Hello and welcome to the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Lee Chambers from Male Allies UK. Lee, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you doing today?
Really well, Lewis, and thank you for having me on, mate. It's a pleasure.
It is going to be a good one. I think we've had lots of conversations before. Some things we agree on, some things we disagree on. So should be a interesting conversation for the listeners. But first, and as always, Lee, in your own words, what makes you a man?
So, what makes me a man, Lewis? Being me. So, each one of us is unique. There are over 4 billion ways to be a man. So, for me, being a man and what makes me a man is actually just turning up as myself, unfiltered, just being who I am, and being curious enough to try and continue to understand who I am. Because we're not just a man when we're born. In fact, are we ever truly a man? I'm still in many ways just a boy navigating the world and learning. But I do feel that it's the journey and the experiments to find out who we are in a world that's constantly changing. And that's what makes me a man. And I think it's what makes everyone a man, finding who they are and then bringing that to the world.
I think so too. I think it's really important that exploration is encouraged. I think it's something that's sort of missing. I would be interested to get an understanding of sort of when you came to that realization. Like, I know for a lot of men, they sort of still hold on to the ideas of masculinity, traditional manism, shall we say. When for yourself did that feel like more of a, you know what, I'm going to go my own way?
Yeah, I think it's been chipped at numerous times by some of the adversity I've been through. So I think firstly, it was when I had some mental health issues at university and I ended up being extracted by security and taken home. And that kind of chipped away at this me trying to be the man who I was by looking externally and trying to get validation from others and finding I actually didn't and couldn't see people like me. So that caused me quite a bit of turmoil. I think the second kind of unpicking and chipping away at all the grime of society that had covered me was when I had to learn to walk again. And, you know, you fall down an awful lot when you try and learn to walk again. And it does make you think, you know, that all those things that I really cherished, kind of physical presence, mobility, independence, self-sufficiency. You know, I had nurses washing me in the shower, healthcare assistants helping me eat. It does make you think what actually is valuable and who am I with when things are taken away and what have I taken for granted. And I think the third kind of chipping away and unpacking and unpicking was when I decided to become a stay-at-home dad and walking into a room and realising I was the only man in the room and then sat there listening to women and just thinking, like, there's a whole world I don't really see, things I haven't really considered, different perspectives, but actually the judgment that I got from making that decision, stepping out of a business that I'd built to do that, both positive and negative, just again held a bit of a mirror to me as a person and made me reflect and think, am I truly exploring who I am and how curious am I? And I'd almost like to say I've always been very much like a 7-year-old kid asking why about things in life, and that really annoyed adults. It got me into some great conversations. It also got me into trouble as well. But I've got a willingness to not conform, but I see how I've been imprisoned by lots of things on my journey. So I think that exploration has expanded, but only through the negative and difficult things I've been through. It's never been expanded by things that have gone well. So I think we need to go through discomfort and struggle to actually start to realise there's a bigger playing field for us to explore as men.
Do you think men as a whole sort of holding on to these sort of traditional virtues, they are quite surface level? It's interesting that you draw parallels to when you were sort of taken away from all of those options. You couldn't do any of those things. That's when this exploration sort of took on for yourself. Do you think a lot of men hide behind that? Do you think that's one of the problems, is I'm just going to be strong, dependent, breadwinner?
Well, I think that there's power within those things when they're kind of done in a way that also allows exploration outside of them. I think if they become a complete barrier to exploration, then they can become limiting. But when combined with exploration, those are actually quite powerful things. They allow endurance on the journey of exploration. They give you the strength and fortitude to go through the challenge. They actually give you a strong anchor when everything's uncertain. So actually, there's power within those virtues. And I think sometimes the demonization of those virtues removes that anchor of stability that some men have and leaves them completely rudderless, which is really not helpful, because as humans, we need something to attach to. And the truth is, I reflect on my own father and many of the men that I speak to. Their fathers were, they operated in that way. They've seen that role modelled. Like, I grew up in a Caribbean household. You believe that discipline was important, because no discipline equals you are not going to grow up to be a good person, and you are going to know about it if you are not disciplined, because, we came to this country to give you an opportunity, and if you don't knuckle down and crack on, then you're not really living the sacrifices that we've made. So I think it's really important that we don't just automatically demonize those aspects. But if they become so entrenched that we can't explore, that does become challenging, because if those do get challenged, then it's challenging the very core foundational principles that we have. And it actually starts to remove the one stable aspect of us. I think it's a massive conversation, but systemically, Lewis, those things are still stuck on men from so many different aspects. And actually, in a purposeful, strategic way to individualize us so we can be exploited by, aspects of capitalism and beyond. So there's actually a purposefulness in how those shape us, because they actually do make us more vulnerable to being manipulated and misinformed.
Talking on sort of systematic sort of change and things that maybe sort of feeding into this, I know you and I both do stuff in and around schools, and you talk a lot about being a boy and asking why. Do you think some of the pressures that are around schools now, so teachers are under immense pressure, right? Do you think that that's sort of squashed boys to allow them to sort of explore a little bit more, sort of test the boundaries, push boundaries, and are sort of being told off and dismissed a lot earlier, whereas maybe in the past you and I might have got away with it with our teachers?
So I think there's a bit of an arc in this. So obviously, for the generation of our fathers, you were getting caned and slippered and being held up by your neck against the wall if you decided to step outside of what was expected of you. And that normalized violence and abuse is quite scary to think about now, that was just how it was. Just a generation detached from us. Obviously, we were at school, and if you started to play up or you were messing around, you got a board duster thrown at you, you got sent out to face the wall, you got detention, and you got to do 200 lines of "I will not do this." And let's be honest, that only ever happens at school. It doesn't happen anywhere else in life. It's interesting to think about these kind of behavior management techniques that don't get used anywhere else in the world, apart from sometimes like when they're trying to torture you if you're a prisoner of war. It says a lot about educational systems and so. But no, I think obviously we live in a world where even education has become like a bit of a commercialized machine, where there's no space for exploration. Like, the only space you might get to explore is in PHSE. Wow, you can ask a question, and even the topic is defined, so you can't go off on a tangent. And children are not measured on curiosity on tangents. They're measured on like a meat factory of GCSE grades. So I mean, we are now seeing boys push some boundaries like any adolescent boy would do, because you're curious, you want to see and test things, you want to make mistakes, because that's how you learn. But you very quickly find yourself in isolation doing that, especially in certain educational establishments where there just isn't the desire to create curious children. Because the difference between children and letters in the Times educational guide, why do you exist? So, I mean, we could sit here for hours and talk, because again, quite often, it's not necessarily teachers. They are capacity-wise absolutely squeezed. They don't have often the competency for some of these conversations. They've not been actively working. Many of them have not had the chance to actively work on critically thinking. So it's very difficult for them to impact them. And also, they live in a different content bubble than kids do. So their kind of proximity to things is quite far away. And like I often say, I sit with young boys in schools and listen. You sit with young boys in schools and listen. They're like laughing that adults are still talking about Andrew Tate, thinking he's a big deal. They're like, we're not bored about him. He's there in his compound, smoking his cigar, drinking his whiskey. That's what Grandad likes. I'm watching The Sidemen. I'm watching videos where people are tricking each other and pranking each other, and it's hilarious. And I'm watching streamers play video games that I like, and I'm watching influencers who create content on the sport that I like, on the music that I enjoy. If I'm honest, most of those young lads are like, I can discern when someone's trying to take the mick out of me. And I can discern when something is clearly wrong because they're saying that. And I'm like thinking about my sister and my mum, and I'm like, no, that's not right. And actually, if we just listen to them, it's really funny because they've got a lot of insight, an awful lot of insight on what it's like to be a teenager nowadays that we don't. And our own presumptions and assumptions can be the very thing that suppresses young lads from properly exploring who they are.
That suppression of young lads is really interesting because I've been thinking about it for a while now, and there's sort of this tone around boys that they're essentially stupid. So you're talking adolescence boys, right? So 12 to sort of 16, that we need to tell them, they need to be told. There's still this is probably where our conversation is going to become our line of disagreement, right? This sort of idea around sort of feminism and that sort of, this is the way it is now, this is what's being told, and this is how you should be. And that for me is where I'm seeing a lot of pushback. But I think this is a great opportunity to sort of explain what male allies is and sort of your opinion on that.
Yeah, so we kind of frame male allyship as a skill set. So how do you work across difference? How do you navigate conversations with people that you might not normally speak to? And how do you fundamentally think about bringing different people together? Because how we see it is out in the workplace, there are lots of different people. Even when you go and do something that's a social activity, there are lots of different people. But in the internet as it is today, the internet funnels you into people who are the same. Think the same backgrounds, same interests. So you very rarely get the opportunity to actually work across difference. So allyship, where does the word even come from? Well, firstly, when I first came across it, I wasn't particularly enamored with it as a term, because the first thing I thought of was militaristic, good guys versus bad guys, shooting, throwing grenades at each other, tanks, and blowing the crap, and lots of conflict that wasn't healthy. So I was a bit like, is this really the one term I want to align the organisation and the work that I do to? But me being that a curious 7-year-old kid, I was like, well, where did the word even start? Where did it even come from? It comes from the old French word allier, which means to combine, to unite, and to bring stuff together. And I was like, that's more of a ethos of what I'm looking to achieve. And obviously, how do I see allyship? It's multi-directional. It's not one way. Some people are very vocal about, well, this group should support this group. And the truth is, there might be some precedence in that. But things can't just be one-way transfer. Like, your battery has both negativity and positivity. And there's polarity there, right? If you just channel things one way, you're going to create polarity at some point in that. So we look at the reciprocity of that. Naturally, our kind of focus on men started because I was in businesses, I was working, I'd built a business, I'd gone on a journey, I'd stepped out. But I was always interested in when it came to anything about people in a business, i.e. design policies, structures for people, I'd walk into those rooms and it was full of women. There was no men actively thinking about, so we've got this enhanced maternity policy, but what about a paternity policy? Or what about wellbeing provision for men? Ooh, let's put yoga on a Friday and a fruit bowl on a Monday. And I was like, why are these decisions very centric and not very engaging to men? And why are men not being centered in any of the communications? But then people say, well, men don't turn up. And the truth is, inclusion historically, all the communications around it have been not centered to get men in the room. And I understand that the work itself might be centered on the fact that certain groups have barriers that some men might not face. Men are not a homogenous group. Men have also lots of challenges. And I think what was really interesting for me, Lewis, is how my work has evolved over time. So when I first became a stay-at-home dad and walked into that room, was the only man in the room, I sat there and I listened to all the mothers and grandmothers about what life was like, different sectors, different ages, different like levels of hierarchy. And every woman had a story, right? Every woman had a story of something she'd been through, gradually trusted me to be able to articulate that. So it made me very impassioned about how do we make the world better for women. What's been interesting on this journey over the past 8-9 years is that the more time I've spent in spaces with men, almost every man has something they're going through or have been through. The truth is, everyone has a story and everyone has challenges. And on a fundamental level, the root of most of those challenges are the very gender stereotypes that suppress us all. And for me, male allyship is men ensuring that they are part of those conversations about what this can be in the future. Because there is a balance there. Men do need to take some agency and step into the room, so they are. Obviously, certain people need to make sure there is space for men to do that. And that's a point of friction in some of the current gender war situations that we find, when actually, if both sides keep pushing each other away, we're going to continue to have the same problems, and that's insanity, right?
For sure. Yeah, it is. I'm a big fan of the sort of phrase, everyone, if the world's problems were put in a pile, everyone would be in a rush to get their own back, which is essentially what you're saying, right? Everyone has their own problems. There's something that is nagging them and sort of frustrating them in some way, shape, or form. I think where a lot of the pushback comes from sort of men of this generation, as you say, this is a generation once removed from patriarchy, essentially, I think is a fair thing to say. The pushback that I seem to get from guys is that allyship, DEI, these sort of groups that are set up, they're all around how can we improve minority groups. So women, guys of colour, this side of things. What is the sort of goal here, rather than looking at an organization as a whole? Like you say, Dave doesn't like fruit, he hates yoga, what are some of the other options? It's more a case of, well, Sandra likes that and she's in a minority group, so that's why we're doing yoga and fruit. And that obviously over time builds up more resentment and starts to have a bit of a pushback on the good work that these sort of things are trying to do. How do you reframe that to try and get people more involved with this?
So I think it is thinking, why are men not in the room? That's the question. Like, why are they not there? And you can identify, are they being pushed out? Do they feel like they're not being communicated? Do they feel like they're not being catered for? Have they not been heard? Do they feel like they won't be listened to?
Yeah.
These are the kind of questions that we need to ask. And it's obviously, I'm fascinated by this work because there are so many different aspects and nuances towards it. I think for our generation, we've kind of gone through quite a shift. Like there are some things that still significantly impact women in the workplace that haven't changed. But there are things over the past 50 years that are fundamentally completely different for women than they were. So some things have made a lot of progress. Some things have barely changed. But for men, not much has changed for us. Whether it's not being given space to, or being afraid of, or even not having anything defined or any guardrails to work within, a lot hasn't changed for us. But the world has changed so much. Community used to be the people on our street, all different, go out for a garden party, different political affiliations, different upbringings, different cultures, different backgrounds, different ages, and we just get together and do stuff. We'd go and hang about on the field with kids from different schools. Like, it's just gone. Like, that difference is gone, and now people are just very close to people who are just exactly the same. And that's doing us a disservice as humans, right? I think that for us as a generation as well, we become deeply tied to what we do in our everyday lives as our profession, as religion drifted away, as locality drifted away. And the damage I saw to other men when we got made redundant from our finance roles that it was literally their life. It's like part of their identity had been ripped out when they got made redundant. That hadn't been the case for my dad's generation in the same way. So for me, it's such an important conversation to look at what men are actually facing in society, because while on the surface it looks like we are more successful than our parents, because of the way the world has gone and the way things have inflated, many of us as men are actually poorer than our own fathers in a lot of different aspects, and not equipped for a world that has different expectations of us. Like, salaries haven't really gone up for men since like the 70s and 80s. In fact, we're poorer. But all these expectations upon us to be a provider in a modern world. I mean, I'm very passionate that men can be a provider. We shouldn't be expected to be the provider, because it's just not compatible in the modern world today. And that will just burn us to a crisp trying to do it. But we're still getting messages to be told to be that. And there's so many conflicting messages about what it means to be a man. Like, most men are just, firstly, confused as hell, because they're being told you should be like this, but don't be like this, but do this and be like this, but not that way. And open up and talk about your struggles, but not too much. And talk to people. But if they don't listen, that's not your fault. But you need to find someone to. It's just so confusing. And most men are in this gap in between what it used to be and what they saw from their own fathers, and this nebulous concept of what it means to be a modern man that isn't well defined or well structured. And, you know, the boys that we've spoken to, only 21% said they've got any kind of clarity on what masculinity is in the future. That's only 1 in 5 that's got some kind of clear idea of what they perceive it looks like and what it can be for them. So there's confusion there, Lewis, and there's a gap. We're all in between how it was and how it can be.
One of the questions you say that we need to ask is, why are men not in the room? I would like to ask you that question, but I would also like to add a little bit of sort of a caveat to that. If only 1 in 5 boys knows what modern man is meant to be, is it not going to be less likely that there's going to be men in those rooms?
I mean, the truth is, what are those rooms designed to do? You know, I think I can be really clear, Lewis. Obviously, some of our work is with gender networks in the workplace, right? If I go out on the street and ask 100 people what gender means, your automatic assumption when someone says gender is woman, even though everyone has a gender, right? Things have defaulted to a certain way of being. And in one of those gender networks, women aren't homogenous either. So these networks are generally, there's a lot more women representation than there is male representation in these networks. Secondly, you've got women who desperately want men's voices in, desperately want men to be included, are frustrated at the lack of progress in both women's and men's ability to break beyond some of these stereotypes. They are vocal about better paternity leave. They are vocal about better men's mental health, more kind of support around things like prostate cancer. And they advocate, and they really do. There are some women in those groups who are kind of in the middle. They're a bit like, well, we have it really tough as women and we've been suppressed for a long time. But also, you know, my partner, my sons, I'm worried about them. They have challenges. Like, we need to think of a better way of doing this. And then in those groups, you have some women who are like, men don't belong here. Men are the problem. You know, men have been oppressing us for years. And I appreciate that often. That's come through some of the trauma that they've faced and some of the challenges. And if we're honest, Lewis, some of the internalized misogyny that we all have based on the world we've grown up in. And we reflect back and look at some of the things from our childhood, right? Some of the programs of the 90s. And you watch them now and you're a bit like, ooh, maybe that's not aged as well. It looked absolutely fine when I was a kid. Because the world has changed and perceptions have changed. But at the same time, like, why are men not in the room? Well, it's a multifaceted thing, really. If you don't see your place, it's quite hard to take up space. If communications make you feel like you might want to opt out, and it's easier to opt out, then you might well take that choice. If you don't feel there's a collaborative environment to create some change, if you feel like you might not be welcome, if you feel that the conversation might potentially be something that you don't necessarily believe in, I think there are a lot of reasons when we speak to men, but if we're honest, there's a lot of fear. And I think that's a massive thing that needs to be addressed. And if we look at, I actively speak to men and say, why are you not going? What would make you go? What's stopping you? What's the biggest concern that you have about engaging in this work? The top one is always fear. That fear is properly multifaceted. So it's not just like one element of fear. Some men are scared about looking like a hero or a saviour, even turning up into that space, not wanting to be looking like there's some ego-driven maniac. Some men are scared of upsetting people. They don't want to get things wrong and upset people. And obviously, sometimes people who are upset can actually be a bit retributive in how they then kind of deal with that. Some men are really worried about what other men would perceive if they turned up in that space. And, some of us, I think it's natural that as men, we quite often look to other men for some level of validation on us being a man. And there's nothing more cutting than a man saying to another man, especially a man you respect, saying, "You've changed, mate. You've changed." And, we don't like that. Even if that might mean you evolve for the better, still feels painful. And then obviously in the current volatility we've got, it can feel like if you get something wrong, it can damage your reputation. You can feel like you might not necessarily get cancelled, but get called out for making a minor mistake or saying something slightly wrong or terminology that was okay last year but not okay this year, which gets me really angry because, language matters, right? But the pedantic aspects of policing people's language, I see it from both sides of the debate. It's just designed to just debase people for no reason. It really, really irritates me quite a lot. And then finally, it's the feeling of competence. We live in an expertise economy. We're supposed to know our stuff. We're supposed to get things right. We're supposed to be able to have a really powerful, structured debate and really put our side across in a powerful way. But the challenge is, it's quite hard to do that in those spaces. Again, because of some of the volatility. Again, because if it's not a topic you've got a lot of familiarity with, it really can be quite hard. Judgment is quick and curiosity is low. Everyone's got an opinion, but not a lot of people got empathy. And that can mean it's really difficult to navigate those spaces where it feels like you're being judged as soon as you walk in the room. And I was at an event yesterday, and it was a majority female event, and there was a man speaking at the front, and it was like, oh God, it's uncomfortable study. And it's just, on one side, embracing that discomfort is powerful. Discomfort is growth, right? At its core. But on the other side, a lot of stuff in the space that I operate in is like hitting people with a bat around the back of the head. That never changed anyone. Yeah. All it did is it made them angry that they kept getting hit. It's kind of simple human psychology. If you keep hitting someone with a bat, at some point, they're probably going to grab it and hit you with it as well. And feel that they're justified to do that. So it is such a balance, because for as long as we've got people saying, you don't belong here, you shouldn't be here, and you're the enemy, are they going to turn up? Unequipped, open, vulnerable? So yeah, it again, it's fascinating to try and facilitate some of these spaces, because the level of polarity and the level of judgment is so problematic, and I believe that's fundamentally driven by some of the scarcity in society, some of the chaos in society, but also there are some people who get a lot of joy out of doing that, and it really does irritate me, because they want to take the high ground but not create space for debate and actually suppress people, and suppress people end up having an outlet somewhere. And that's where we see men being violent towards themselves. It's where we see men becoming more isolated. So yeah, I find myself in a place where I try and be as transparent as I can about my frustrations with both sides. Because there is frustration. But then you understand why sides are frustrated, but then you're also like, is there a point where we can become humans and just realize we've got a crap load of commonality, and we get stuck focusing on these differences?
The trauma thing's really interesting for me, because I've actively not spoken about certain topics that have gone on in my life, because I feel like I have not healed from them. I really like the saying, speak from scars, not wounds, sorry. Because if you're still hurting, you're going to sort of bring that to the table, and it definitely doesn't help things. I think that's where that empathy and that sort of concise, controlled conversation disappears, because you're talking from a point of hurt, and you're sort of tarnishing everyone with the same brush. We've seen the biggest problems with that in regards to sort of Me Too, and then Not All Men, like this just constant battle of essentially injured people talking at each other for no real reason. I know your sort of whole ethos is trying to get people in the room together, but what's your thoughts on letting men be men and letting women be women and letting them sort their own stuff out away from each other? Why do we need to be together to solve every problem?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Lewis, because I don't feel that it always needs to be everyone together, but I do feel that it often starts with realizing everyone's got blind spots, and we've got blind spots to those differences, and if we don't actually ever get together, we never see the commonalities. And I think so we've obviously done stuff in schools, and we've done like allied projects with boys and girls. And what we found is if you separate them and ask them what they want from each other, and then bring them back to create a little bit of a way of being together, like if I'm to boil it down into something really simple, the boys wanted the girls to listen to them and not judge them, and the girls wanted the boys to talk to them and be a bit respectful. So what they actually wanted from each other is to talk and listen. And it's just, you can see how they've been polarized away from each other. And it's like, it's really, really depressing, because if we are polarized from each other, there's no chance to explore each other's experiences and realize that lots of the things that we go through in adolescence, when your hormones are raging through you, whether you're a boy or a girl, it's just trying to work out who you are in this crazy ass world. And that's a similar experience, even though there are differences. So I'm really passionate that, firstly, I do believe that part of the healing requires people who are similar to yourself to create spaces for those healing. I do feel that men working with men to heal an aspect of brotherhood, and women working with women to kind of deprogram and heal and foster some aspects of sisterhood, because lots of the women that I speak to say the person who's treated them the worst in their life, in their workplace experience, the person who suppressed them, not let the talent shine through, has actually been another woman. And I think, that in itself is a conversation that, as a man, I try and have, but you gotta be careful in how you frame that. But I think we have a responsibility in our kind of gendered groups to support each other through the challenges, because we've got some of those deep commonalities and deep similarities in how we've been conditioned. Because look at us as men and women. Like, it's comical. People are like, oh, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Guess what? None of those genders live on those planets. We all live on Earth together.
Yeah.
We've gotta find a way to not just coexist, but kind of co-create stuff together. Because that's what most of us do on a daily basis, whether we like it or not. I'm really passionate that there are times for us to split, but that split is to try and kind of heal ourselves and build ourselves to come back together more structured. And I think sometimes it's hard. I do feel that, again, people start talking about, well, you just need to be an ally to this group. It's very hard to be an ally if you're struggling yourself. People need to be supported before we place expectations on them to start shifting across. And because you can't open up to the benefits of being allied to if you're struggling either. In fact, sometimes you need to be allied to first before you can look how you can get into a better place to be an ally for someone else. And I think that reciprocity gets missed if we talk about it in a one-dimensional sense, and pretending that again, you could take a group of men and a group of women, and there's massive diversity in those groups. And there are very few men who are truly benefiting from the patriarchy as a system. Because we need to go there as a system. But then it's not a system on its own, Lewis. That's the thing.
I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that can't say that word, so that's not going to happen. I want to talk about the sort of giving back, because I think a lot of men feel that allyship is one directional, but I really want to touch on sort of a group that we have both worked with and both have experiences with, which is boys from low social economic backgrounds, where the idea of the patriarchy, the idea of their dad having a mental health day, the idea of potentially even having a male role model in their life is non-existent. So the idea of supporting minority groups for them is so far away, because they don't even know where dinner's coming from in some of these cases. Where is the where is the give back to that group? I feel that's what's missing, right? Are you
Yeah.
seeing change?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because you take the perspective of a 13-year-old boy from a lower socioeconomic background. He will have lots of influences in his life. He will want better for himself. And, I've sat there with these lads and they've said, look, how is the world going to work for me? Like, I might be able to go and get a job after I finish school, but the job that my dad used to do, it don't even exist anymore. Like, and I look at the money, and I look at jobs because I'm only a few years before I have to go and get one, and I look at these jobs, and it's like it's £23,000 a year, £25,000 a year, and I've looked and thought, how am I ever going to buy a house, or even like insure a car? And they're 13 years old. They're already looking at this stuff. How am I going to live? I've had a 13-year-old lad say to me, I speaking to my dad, and my dad said that some of the things that he buys that he bought 10 years ago are like 3-4 times more than they were 10 years ago, and his wage hasn't changed. So if things keep going like that, am I even going to be? I'm going to be at home, but my parents are struggling. Am I going to work to help them? But how am I going to help them? And it's so difficult because they are also like, I don't understand why we've got a month to celebrate people for Pride and a month to celebrate Black History and all these weeks and all these days, but it doesn't feel like there's any like celebration day for me. Like, there just doesn't feel like there's any, and I don't understand why. Like, why am I not being celebrated or championed? I've got it really bloody hard, and actually, even to turn up at school is a big deal, and yet I still get like, oh, uniforms a bit dirty, lad. Like, tuck your shirt in, and they just don't feel like they're being listened to. It is like, it's really disenfranchising because I grew up on an estate. We didn't have much, but a few adults kind of believed in me, and that gave me an opportunity to do something. And speaking to some of the lads who don't have that trusted adult, it's really, really, I mean, it makes you really sad, to be honest, is the honest answer, Lewis. Yeah. And I'm sure you feel that when you sat there and you're almost like, what can I do? Like, and there are millions of these lads across the country who these subjects are just obscure to them. When your basic needs are barely being met, high level conversations about systems, it's just so far away. But you also see the glint in their eyes as well, like you see they've got tenacity. You see they've been ground down by the world and they're only 13. And you're like, someone needs to be championing you and celebrating you somewhere. And it's like when you've got, like the Big Brother type programs out in America, the different stuff like that makes, but it's funded. The biggest thing in our research is these lads are saying there's just nowhere, our physical spaces are gone. The things that we did to connect in real life, they've just been decimated. They're not being funded. There's not enough volunteers for all these activities I used to do. Adults are just not bothering. And that means I don't get that chance. And these were spaces where I might end up looking up to my scout leader or the guy who run the news agents, an actual man who I can see in real life who I think I'd like to be like him when I'm older. But these young lads, the truth is, they become so disenfranchised and desperate that the online voices that aren't helping give them a comforting message that it's not your fault. And that means that they're easily misinformed and misled, and sadly brought into a capitalistic dream of being rich and having choice and freedom. which sadly in many ways is just a trap to try and get them to buy stuff online and shape their beliefs so they can be manipulated. And it just, I mean, you'd look at it and you would consider it extremism in other aspects. But yeah, it's where we're at, Lewis. There's a lot of work to be done, and we can't just leave boys to struggle on the basis that a sliver of men in society are in such a privileged place they can do what they want.
Yeah, you talked about resilience and how it shapes you, and you see, like, some people would buy that backstory, right? Rags to riches backdrop, rough childhoods, poor upbringing, but there was hope, right? There was always this, if I work a bit harder at this and I do this and I do this, and I can make it. That seems to have gone. The middle class seems to have disappeared. There doesn't seem to be a next level. And that is like where you say, where this extremist comes in, and it's like, right, well, if you're not making 10K a month, you're worthless. Like, that's essentially the tagline of the internet, right? And to be honest with you, inflation's so bad, I'm pretty sure that's going to be twice as much these days now as well. So it's, yeah, it is just getting insane. I don't know the answer. I wish I did know the answer for these boys. I wish there was something that we could start working towards. I think it's more conversations, allowing them to talk, right? But right now it seems quite far away. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I reflect back, and obviously lads who I was on the estate with are all over the place. Some are in the criminal justice system. Some are kind of working those vulnerable jobs. Some are still on the estate where we grew up. Some have moved and scattered across the country. But some of us had opportunity and some didn't. And that played such a pivotal role in where we are 40 years after we've been born. And I just look at that and think it would have only taken one or two adults to not believe in me.
Yeah.
And I'd have had a very, very different pathway. And that's the kind of core I take into this work. The challenge is the way things are structured now to literally just suck the life out of 99% of the population. It was just exploitative. And the truth is, we can talk about patriarchy till we go blue in the face. Patriarchy is not about men and women. It's about classism and caste. It's about fragmenting people so you can extract them. That's what it is. And it's a very clever system that's divide and conquer, that's individualized people, that gets them focused on unrealistic expectations, on untruths that are put out by people wanting to be something and showcasing a version of themselves that's idealized. And while we're all distracted, they just continue to mine the earth of its resources, mine humans of their resources. It's just, I mean, that kind of stuff gets me proper down. But how many people can we inspire to come together? Like, some young lads are starting to say, I'm actually sick of this. Doesn't feel fair at all. I need to work out how I can be part of the change for the future. And, you know, there is hope. Like, some of the young lads I speak to are like, you know what, things are pretty terrible. But actually, I'm going to find a way. I am going to find a way. Yeah, they inspire me in lots of ways, Lewis. Because they are growing into a time that's nothing like when we grew up. And we can look at the time and said, you know what, this recession and all this austerity stuff, it's terrible. Like, it's not fair. Like, how can we afford these massively inflated houses? I look at them now and I'm like, how are they even going to afford to feed themselves? And it just feels like so different because they're in this incredibly quick moving world where, and the stuff I'm talking to young lads around AI companions and girlfriends, and it's just, I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. But these are things that we're letting be done to our children. That's what it comes down to at the end of the day, Lewis. If we don't care about our kids, if we're willing to outsource that parenting to nefarious companies that don't give a crap, what are we going to expect? The challenge is many of us, like you said, a little bit wounded from our own journeys, and we need to heal our scars and then wear our scars as medals and use those scars as, you know, walking with some pride with them, because many of us have faced some of those lacerations and We just need space to heal. We need to work to heal together, but not forget that young people are getting very, very damaged, very, very young by the world that we're in, and the education system isn't necessarily a place of healing. Let's just say that.
Well, let's touch a little bit more on that hope side of things. What in the men and boys space right now do you really like, and what do you want to see more of in the future?
So I think in the men and boys space, firstly in the men's space, what I'm seeing is the current pushback around DEI, while looking like a challenge on the surface, is actually now having organisations asking, why are men not engaging? Why are men resistant? Why are men not part of the change? And that's the start. That's the start. There's recognition now that men are not in the room, and therefore we can ask questions about why not. And work like ours can become something that actually becomes a tool to think about why, assess why, and start to actually work on men's inclusion and inclusion. In the boys space, it is the fact that I'm finally starting to see some collaboration between some of the entities that are already doing this work. Obviously, adolescence had its good side for amplification. Never show crap like that in schools, for the love of God. But I am starting to see some collaboration and more reports and focus, and that needs to happen to be able to bring boys' voices into policy and change, with a realisation that while adulthood is the most effective marketing campaign that exists on the planet, welcome, you're a binary age now, welcome to adulthood, here's what you're supposed to be like, absolute crap. Is that actually we're starting to have some of those conversations, and there are more men coming together, like we had the pleasure of doing at Danny Ellie's with Jack, that are actually thinking, how do we do this unique work that we do in different ways, but actually come and support each other? So there is finally some collective movement, both from a research perspective, a policy perspective, and just getting together and supporting each other.
Lee, it's been an absolute pleasure. If people have liked what they've heard and they want to hear more, where's the best place to find you? And I will leave the final thoughts with yourself.
So the best place to find me was being slightly annoying and professional troublemaker on LinkedIn. You can also find a bit more at leadchambers.org. And for everyone listening, just don't forget, like, your kind of manhood is based around who you are. Don't let other people tell you how to be a man. Go out there and find out who you are through tests, through challenge, and just own it. There are so many different ways. Just be your way. When I was younger, I went to search what it meant to be a man and got lots of conflicting opinions and ended up confused. And then I just realised, wait a minute, you just find it out for yourself. And it takes time to get those keys to open up some of the doors inside you that you've never opened. But you know what? It's the best journey you'll ever go on. And you're the biggest experiment you'll ever undertake. So just get curious. Stop judging yourself.